fellow Falcoholics. What is up? Welcome to episode 322 of the Falcoholic Live. I'm your host, Kevin Knight at Falcoholic Kevin, joined for the first time in a month. Adnan Ikic is back at Say Which Way. Adnan, welcome back. How are you doing? Welcome back to the show. It's draft season, officially now draft month. So welcome back. And I guess I already asked, but again, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. You know, the weather in Atlanta is warming up. I have been resistant to the calls to cut my hair, so the locks are still flowing right now. Yeah, I'm still not where you are, Kevin, but I don't think I'll ever get to that point. But, you know, we're rolling with it right now. But, yeah, we're ready to talk some Falcons. And, you know, it's been a month. I don't think I've missed anything over the past month.
You picked the perfect time to go, honestly. You're like, all right, free agency. All right, I'm out. Back before the draft, nothing happened really. Yeah, so you're absolutely right about that. We're happy to have you back, and didn't have to miss any serious news. I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunate at this point, but yeah, not a whole lot's happened. Yeah,
and no disrespect to Divine Diablo or you know the stellar free agents that the Falcons brought in, but yeah, you know, I can't wait to be there for the meltdown after we go offense first in the first round again this year.
Yes. So, yes, of course, we have with us another brother in pain with the Atlanta Falcons offseason, Aaron Freeman at Locked On Falcons, joining us once again. Aaron, welcome back. We got your takes prior to free agency. Now, of course, it's time for the draft takes. I know the Kirk Cousins situation. We're not here to talk about Kirk Cousins, so we're not gonna do that. You know, maybe like in the context of maybe player trades during the draft, like a little bit, but we're really not here to talk about Kirk Cousins. So now that you know, I am sorry that the Kirk Cousins situation is going to be with us probably at least until June, unfortunately. But other than that whole situation, how are you doing, my friend?
You know, I'm doing great. I did cut my hair, unlike Adnan, and so I was rocking the fro all throughout free agency, and now I just decided, I just wanted to trim it down and whatnot. But yeah, I'm glad that we do not have to talk about Kirk Cousins. I hate the fact that that's the most notable thing that has happened to the Atlanta Falcons, the will they, won't they of Kirk Cousins, and nothing else of note has really happened so far this offseason. Now, hopefully that changes in the draft, but knowing the Falcons, like it's going to be an interesting weekend when we get to the end of April. But yeah, I'm glad to be talking ball and not talking Kirk Cousins, at least on today's episode.
Yeah. We're going to try to keep the Kirk Cousins chatter to a minimum until June 1st, because that's probably when something will actually happen with Kirk Cousins, and probably not before. So until then, we can have a short reprieve from the constant chatter. But do want to shout out George Costanza, who's back, and shout out to George. I know he's been out very busy on in his life, so I'll let George discuss whatever he wants about that. But we love to have George back, and George throwing down, apparently making up for missed time. George dropping the $200 donation. George, thank you so much. I appreciate you. He says 3 Atlanta rules for life. Number 1, the Falcons and Hawks will continue to perpetually disappoint. Number 2, I-285 will always be a pain in the ass no matter where you are. And 3, always will be here to donate NFL shop gift cards for the Falcoholic Live Draft Show. George, thank you so much once again. I know you guys have a lot of fun with that. We enjoy the giveaway as well. And this is not a if I'm not acting super shocked, it's because George and I did discuss this beforehand. But yes, George, once again, going to be providing some NFL shop gift cards for our giveaway during the draft party once again. So once again, thanks to George for that. I know you guys love it. George loves it too. A lot of fun. And thank you, George, for the donation. And then he throws in a 2803 donation. Wow, really twisting the knife with this one, George. Says, I think Atlanta should take Ashton Jeanty because what we really need in Atlanta is a 3-headed monster in the backfield, and we need the memes. In seriousness, he likes Mykel Williams or Malachi Starks. Just perfect for this defense.
We need an official one, George. We can't have a one or the other. We need need you to give us your official pick at
he is the hashtag. Aaron is the hashtag prophet for Falcons Twitter. George is the hashtag prophet for hot draft takes. So George, if you have an official pick, at some point you can let us know, and we'll have to encode that in the list of Falcons hot takes. But thank you so much, George. We really do appreciate you. Thanks to everybody else for supporting the show as well. I'm excited to get into it tonight. We're going to be talking about the NFL draft, obviously, sort of overall thoughts on how the Falcons are going to navigate this, given that we have seen free agency now, and it's been, pretty quiet. I did a whole show about how I thought they haven't done enough. Now they could still do more, and obviously we're going to see what happens in the draft and all this, so we're not going to get too mired down in that. But knowing at this point that the Falcons didn't exactly get major reinforcements, they kind of patched holes and that sort of thing, and kind of kept. I think you could probably make an argument that the defense has marginally improved while the offense has taken a step back, unfortunately, with the loss of Drew Dahlman. But I think the team's goal was clearly to not get substantively worse and not lose anything critical, and go into the draft being able to address what they want, which at this point, I know we got that Kelvin Banks private workout tweet so, to really stoke the flames of potential Falcons first round picks. But we're going to sort of talk about what we think the best ways to navigate the draft could be, also what we think the Falcons will do, because those aren't necessarily the same thing. They haven't often been the same thing over the past 4 years, but we'll talk about it. We'll get into it. And we appreciate everyone. If you guys have got your own thoughts, feel free to throw those out there as well. But yeah, I mean, I think I'll open the floor here to Aaron first. Honestly, I haven't heard from either one of you guys about your overall thoughts, but Aaron, I know, obviously I think you're feeling sort of the same way about free agency, in that it's kind of been just kind of a wet blanket. Like, it's not exciting, right? And it's not enthusing. But sort of, how do you feel about the state of the team now going into draft month, and what you think sort of is the sort of main takeaway for fans at this point?
Well, I think the Falcons' overall approach is not something that was a surprise to a lot of folks, which is they're kind of taking this offseason as their 2022 offseason all over again, where they're going to take a big hit on the dead money. Then it was with Matt Ryan trading him away, and this year it's going to be with Kirk Cousins, with the idea of we're not going to spend a ton of money. We'll make some, as you said, Kevin, we'll patch some holes, and then we'll have a windfall of cash next offseason, and then we'll spend our big money and to maybe make that push, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. And it'll work this time because instead of Marcus Mariota, we have Michael Penix Jr., right? And it's like, okay, like that's fine. But the problem is, I don't think you have the sort of job security that Arthur Smith had going into that 2022 season, with Raheem Morris and company going into year two, right? With Terry Fontenot's now 5 years into his time as a general manager, is yet to have a winning season. At that point, we were just like 1 year in, and it was like, oh, well, they just need to rebuild it and tear this thing down. And so I think that's really where my frustration with the free agent approach has been. It just didn't seem to have the sense of urgency that I think is necessary given the circumstances, where you don't have necessarily the job security of what you had in 2022, and that you probably should have taken a more aggressive approach like you did in 2023 to upgrade some of these holes on the defense. And, it's not to say that they've done a terrible job, but, a lot of the moves that they're making are, basically the same moves that, they're basically making lateral moves at a lot of positions. Leonard Floyd and Matthew Judon, basically the same. Divine Diablo and Troy Anderson, basically the same as sort of athletic guys that are making the conversion to linebacker in the NFL. Mike Hughes is coming back. Jordan Fuller. I think Justin Simmons is probably better than Jordan Fuller. But like Jordan Fuller is just basically like a 1 year stopgap at that sort of position. So it's one of those things where like you didn't really see the big needle moving move that you're like, oh, okay, like that's going to be the reason why this Falcons defense is going to make a significant jump this upcoming season. And so that's the frustrating thing, where it's just like, okay, well, I guess it's all going to be on Michael Penix and this offense that they've invested a lot of resources in to kind of carry this team if they're going to have success this upcoming season, which is nothing new for Falcon fans. But because we've done this song and dance so many times over the last 15 plus years, it's just kind of like, okay, like we're doing this again. Like it hasn't really worked all that much the last couple of times we tried this, outside of like the MVP season that Matt Ryan had in 2016. And so it's like, I don't think it's going to work this time, but we'll just wait and see, and complain about it when it all comes crashing down or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. Is that Michael Penix staring down the Eye of Sauron, or is that no? It's the Dune worm, and he's the son of Gaib, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know if you guys can see the show. I'll move the camera angle over so you guys can see this. Is this original Freeman? Is this an original Freeman
Yes.
artwork here?
Yes.
Wow, great stuff. I
Thank
love
you.
that. Yeah, and that feels like what we're dealing with here. I don't know who the sandworm is in this situation. I don't know if he's like if the sandworm is the NFC South or if it's actually like the staff. Like he actually has to conquer the staff and sort of will this team to victory. But you know,
All of the above.
yeah, okay, it's all that. Okay, good to know. Good to know. Great work there. Love that. But yes, Adnan, welcome back. And yeah, I mean, your thoughts sort of on where the team stands now heading into draft month.
I mean, pretty much echoing the same as Aaron here in that I don't know that the team right now, from a talent perspective, is better than it was at the end of last season because there were a lot of lateral moves, and then you had the biggest loss out of the whole plus minus equation for this team in terms of Drew Dahlman. So, Drew Dahlman leaves. No matter what you think of Drew Dahlman, he was a very good center. He was a very good run blocker. I know sometimes there was some stuff to be desired in pass protection, but I don't know that Ryan Newsel was fine in relief of him last year when Drew Dahlman was out for a little bit, but I don't know that Ryan Newsel is going to be an upgrade over Drew Dahlman. I think the Falcons will take a step back at the center position. Probably will take a step back at the safety position. Divine Diablo, I don't know what you think of him. I mean, I guess he'll be better than Landman. Even though his coverage abilities and his stats in the coverage game weren't the best over the past few years, but he at the very least has better tools than Nate Landman with his speed and with his athleticism. Maybe Olbrich and Raheem Morris can coach him up into being an upgraded version there. I'm shocked. I'm actually really surprised that the team took the approach that they did because of the point that Aaron made in that I don't know that Terry Fontenot's job security is all that great and that I don't know if he will survive another season where the team doesn't make the playoffs. So I was actually fully expecting him to go into this offseason guns blazing with that urgency, restructuring contracts left and right to try and save his job the same way that we saw Thomas Dimitroff and Dan Quinn do in the 2020 offseason. Now, I don't know, maybe this is just speculation. Maybe Arthur Blank wasn't a big fan of that because he lived through that in 2020 and that set the team back years. We'll never know that. And nobody's ever going to talk about that. Maybe Terry Fontenot thinks that his job security is better than it is. Maybe he has been, promised something that we don't know. Maybe he's just that confident in Michael Penix dragging, this Falcons team with less talent than last year to, new heights. And, it could be an either or thing. But I was surprised when the team was as quiet as they were in free agency this year. I think one thing is for sure, and that's that they are fully reliant on Michael Penix being a star player. And it's to the point where it's the same as how the team was fully reliant on Matt Ryan for years and years. Is it fair to Michael Penix? No, but it's just the reality of the situation that here's the franchise. It's now on you to carry this entire franchise at the very least over the next couple of years, and hopefully help will be on the way. But yeah, this team will live and die with Michael Penix. If he is not what they anticipate him to be, then it could get nasty in the next season or two.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot to ask of a quarterback who played like a handful of games to be your savior, but that definitely feels like where we are. And I guess I don't want to rain on people's parade, but I feel like there's a lot of assumptions happening about Penix. Like he's going to be the franchise quarterback. Like he is our franchise, but I want to preface it by saying I think Penix showed us everything we wanted to see in the small sample size. Like nothing he did concerns me or makes me worried about his future. But I also think it's a leap kind of to go from seeing a few games of a quarterback when we've seen quarterbacks have great rookie seasons and fall off. Like, we saw a few games of Penix that were very encouraging, but, I mean, I don't know. Am I crazy for trying to pump the brakes on just assuming Penix is like problematic? Like could be maybe like, have a sophomore slump percent. I mean, it's not a traditional situation, right? He didn't play a full rookie season. He didn't do anything else. So like, I don't know, Aaron, what do you think? Like, should we be pumping the brakes a little bit on the Penix hype, or is that the only thing we can latch onto as a positive? So maybe we just need to let that kind of run wild.
Well, I was of the mindset back in January, like, okay, let's slow the Penix hype a little bit, and then we got to March, and then like the Falcons weren't doing anything, and I was like, okay, well, this is all we got. Like, this is all it is. And so, like, I agree with you. Like, I think objectively, when you look at it, like there are issues. I don't think they're like glaring problems that make you go like, oh, Michael Penix is going to be a bust. But there are issues that he is going to have to overcome in his first full season as a starting quarterback that we just haven't really seen him get tested wise, because as you said, like we only really got 3 games, and like, some of the accuracy concerns that showed up in that Washington game, right? The fact that you will see teams that will basically play a lot of man coverage against Michael Penix to test his accuracy, right? Like that was one of the big questions about Michael Penix coming out of Washington, that despite him being a very efficient quarterback in college, the accuracy could be a little spotty. And, in the Giants game, it was fine. In the Carolina game, it was fine. But like in the Washington game, it was like, like he's missing a lot of throws in this game. And so what a lot of NFL teams are going to do is they're like, okay, well, the thing that Washington was doing was they were playing a lot of man coverage and they were playing a lot of Tampa 2. And then Carolina came in week 18 and played a lot of Tampa 2, and Penix picked them apart. But the one thing that these defenses, the better defenses that the Falcons are probably going to face, and they face generally in those last 3 games, are they're going to be, okay, we'll just man up the Falcons wide receivers and we'll make Darnell Mooney and we'll make Drake London, we'll make Kyle Pitts beat us. And if they can, then, and Penix can pick them apart, then he's going to be a successful quarterback. But if it's kind of hit and miss, kind of like it was in those final 3 games, like that's going to be a thing that's not going to maybe doom him to be a bad quarterback, but it is going to be something that is going to limit his ceiling in order to be the sort of tractor that we need to basically carry the carcass of the Atlanta Falcons roster across the finish line to be a successful team this year. So I think there are challenges ahead for Michael Penix. As you indicated, I don't think there's anything that you sit there and go like, oh, this is a major red flag that's going to cause him to be this outright bust. But in terms of getting to the level that when you look at the roster as things sit here today, that he needs to get to in order for this team to be successful, that I think there are some questions. There is a leap that needs to be made, and we haven't seen it yet. And, not to sit here and say it's the same thing, but we kind of just went through this with Desmond Ridder, where we got a little overhyped on 4 games and focus on the positives and ignore the negatives. And then once we saw him for an expanded amount of reps, the negatives started to show themselves a little bit more. And so I don't think Penix is going to be a disaster like Ridder was in his first full season as a starter, but some of those negatives that we may not be focusing on right now may become bigger issues over a larger game sample.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Like I think expecting Penix to have an up and down second season where we could still come away pretty confident in his abilities and like thinking he's a franchise quarterback, that's probably like the 50th percentile outcome. Like the average outcome is like Penix is probably good enough to make us like, I think, fairly confident in him going forward. But I don't know that he's going to be able to like will a team that may have talent deficiencies, especially on defense, to like a winning record by himself. Now, there's obviously the opportunity for him to have a better, outcome than that. Like I'm saying, this is kind of the middle outcome. So if he has a great sort of outcome, then yes, maybe he can take this huge step and everything that we're all sort of hoping with Penix comes true, where he has opportunity to work with the first team and those like accuracy and timing issues that we saw, particularly on the deep routes that you mentioned. Maybe that all gets sort of leveled off and sort of taken care of at this point. And it all works out. But, I think assuming like a lot of people, I think it's dangerous that some people are kind of jumping to the conclusion that he is going to be this slam dunk franchise quarterback when we've only seen a few games. And I think maybe just temper your expectations a little bit, not like saying expect him to be a bust, because that's lame. We're not going to do that. But like just, relax a little bit with that. But Adnan, I'm curious sort of what you think about Penix and sort of how I feel like, you think we're maybe anointing him a little too soon at this point?
Yeah, no, for sure. Like, and I'm just saying this for his own good, or for the own good of being fair to Michael Penix. Of It's not fair for us to come in and say, all right, he's the next Pat Mahomes, or he's the next, Tom Brady, or the next amazing quarterback, because it's not fair to him as a player going into what will be his fourth career start in week one. We need to pump the brakes a little bit, and it's also not fair the position that the team has put him in, because now we're really going to see the effects of that flawed mentality that they had last year of, yes, you take Penix in the top 10, but you also give Kirk Cousins all of this money at the same time, because, obviously young quarterbacks are almost all a work in progress. Not everyone's Pat Mahomes year 2 winning the MVP. So, you obviously, the big benefit to having a young quarterback is his rookie scale salary, meaning that you can really build up a team around him and you can do it very quickly. The Falcons have forfeited that luxury because, they're paying Kirk Cousins a lot of dead money, or it's not dead money yet. They're paying Kirk Cousins, $40 million this season in salary, plus Michael Penix's money. So, the quarterback position is being taken by a large chunk of the salary cap. It's going to be another, 10 million minimum next year for Kirk Cousins, plus whatever you're paying Michael Penix. I'm sorry, I don't have Michael Penix's numbers right in front of me. Unless they find a way to trade Kirk Cousins, which we all hope is going to be the case over the next few months. But the team isn't fair in regards to now they cannot build this team around Michael Penix the way that they would be able to another rookie scale contract had they, not made the mistake of giving Kirk Cousins all of that money. So it's not a great situation. Obviously, we hope that Penix is as good as possible and as good as he was in that Panthers game. But, there were some negatives. There were definitely some accuracy issues in that Washington game. The Carolina defense, they're not exactly world beaters. So I'm not ready to sit here and say, all right, yeah, he's going to be an all-pro next year. I would like that, but, as opposed to what you described as the 50th percentile outcome, Penix being an all-pro and just dragging this team to 13 wins and just, turning this team into a single-handed contender next year, I think that's maybe in the top 5 percentile.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's also, there's a lot of in between too. Like he could be like a top 10 quarterback and, not be an all-pro or pro bowler and just kind of be on the outside looking in. But if we can just get like league average or better play, I think that would be a good outcome for, essentially what is going to be like a quasi rookie quarterback. And, I don't think there's any reason for people to not have hope for Penix. First of all, I'm not trying to say if you want to like be really enthused and excited about the potential for Penix, then you should be. And I'm not trying to dampen your spirits. I'm simply saying it feels like there's like an assumption like that he's going to be great like immediately, and it's like maybe like don't start there. Like let him actually like grow, and like let's just like get into that a little bit more, I think, as opposed to just anointing him this offseason, and then if things start slowly, then everyone's going to be pissed off. So let's maybe not do that. Let's maybe give him a little bit more time to relax. But, sort of moving past free agency into the draft discussion, we did have a donation from TD with the $5. Thank you, TD. Appreciate you. Says from weeks 13 and on, I think the team's D-line did look better. Still all for edge in round one, but don't think it's as much of a need compared to other holes on D. That's an interesting take. I know a lot of people would definitely have edge number one, but I agree with you, TD, that there are a number of other very compelling defensive needs as well. And then George says on the Penix note, says, here's the thing. If Michael Penix is a bust, it'll show very quickly that we'll probably have a very subpar season, and we'll be going into the next draft looking for yet another quarterback. Hopefully next year will be a better draft for quarterbacks. I feel like that's the rallying cry of all these teams.
That is not a cycle you want to be
next
part
year.
of.
Yes. So hopefully we won't have to face that down, but it does kind of lead us to the discussion of the first round and what to do in the first round. And I've talked about it a lot, so I kind of want to open the floor to you guys because I haven't heard from you guys. But Adnan, I'll go to you first on this one. Like, where are you sort of leaning with pick 15? Like, if the Falcons were to stay at 15, what kind of position or prospects do you like there at the moment?
I mean, I'd like to think that this is finally going to be the draft where they take an edge or a pass rusher for once.
Finally.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll never put anything past the Falcons, but we've been calling for this for a long time, and I get it. Like they've been burned. Like they were burned by taking Tack McKinley, even though technically had they just stayed put and taken T.J. Watt, it would have been great. I mean, they were burned-ish taking Vic Beasley, even though Beasley did have that All-Pro season in 2016. But like, it just seems kind of inconceivable to me for the team to not go defense. And the name that I'm looking at, there are going to be options for you among pass rushers. Like it's not going to be like there's not going to be any like options, and then you're just stuck holding the bag and taking whatever is available. If the team stays put at 15, Jalon Walker could possibly be there. I don't know what you think of Shamar Stewart. He's a very polarizing player at this point, but he could be there. My favorite name right now is Mike Green. Among the pass rushers, we'll see what happens out of Marshall. Maybe that changes until the draft, but right now, if I was sitting at 15 and Mike Green was available, I'd be thrilled if that was the pick. So I mean, yeah, Arthur Blank said in his press conference this is going to be a very defense-focused draft. I mean, I don't disagree with him personally. I don't know why an owner would be, saying that to the media a month before the draft. But to each their own. He owns the team; he can do whatever he wants. But yeah, I'd like to think we're going pass rusher, and then we're going to load up on defense over the next few picks after that. But knowing the Falcons, they could go tackle.
Yes.
So who knows?
The Kelvin Banks rumors. I mean, it is smokescreen season too, but I would never like I tweeted, never underestimate this team's ability to find any offensive player to take instead of defense in the first round. But yeah, Aaron, curious sort of where you're at right now. You can talk about offensive tackle too if you think they're serious about it, but sort of where are you sort of leaning at as we stand right now?
Well, my most recent episode of Locked On Falcons, I spent 20 minutes explaining why they have to take an edge rusher at 15. There's like no other choice. Like it's just terrible decision making, right? That they have continued to punt at that position over and over and over and again. And the result, you reap what you sow. And they have sowed the seeds to be the worst pass rush in the NFL. Whether you look at the 4 years under Terry Fontenot, the 5 years prior to that, the 10 years prior to that, the 20 years prior to that, like they cannot sit here and making another excuse in round one to take another position other than an edge rusher. That's just the bottom line. And that's how I feel about it. Like there are other needs in this draft, but D tackle, you can get a D tackle later in the draft. This is deep D tackle class, right? Cornerback, you probably could use potentially two corners in terms of the nickel and an upgrade over Mike Hughes at the outside cornerback spot. But like, this is not really a cornerback top heavy draft class, right? Where like the player that you would probably look at in round one is Will Johnson out of Michigan. And like Will Johnson's not, in my humble opinion, and I know other people's opinion, but he's like a zone corner. Like, like that's not a guy that you're going to covet in round one to be like, oh, we got to get this guy because he's Christian Gonzalez or he's Patrick Surtain or that type of player. Like he's not that type of guy that you can say, oh, go cover Mike Evans and lock him down, right? Go cover AJ Brown and lock him down. Go cover, Tyreek Hill and lock him down. Like that to me is not Will Johnson. So the idea of taking a cornerback in round one just doesn't make a ton of sense to me. And if you're going to go nickel, like you can get a nickel cornerback in the 4th round, safety is the same situation. Linebacker is the same situation. Like you're looking for depth at those spots. That's not a player that I think you take in round 1, right? Like, again, you can upgrade over Divine Diablo. You can upgrade over Jordan Fuller at those positions, but like you have the world's worst pass rush that's ever existed on the history of the planet. And like you're drafting safeties and linebackers, like it doesn't make any sense. So I continue to stand on this hill that the Falcons, and I will die on this hill. And I've said on the most recent episode of Locked On Falcons that if they do not take an edge rusher in the first round, it's the beginning of my villain era. If you thought I was a villain before, it's going to dial it up to 1,000% at this point in time, because there's just absolutely no excuse for this team to take anything other than edge rusher. Take the best edge rusher in the draft class. If you don't love the value at pick 15, then if some blue chip, if Mason Graham, I saw a mock draft recently, Mason Graham fall into the Falcons at 15. Hey, right? You have 4, 5 D tackles. You don't need a D tackle, a pass rushing D tackle, right? Everybody wants to replace Grady Jarrett, but you have Zach Harrison, you have David Onyemata, you have Morgan Fox, you have Brandon Dorless, you have Ruka Aurora. One of those guys, there's a chance, again, a slim chance, whatever you want to say, one of those guys will be a halfway decent interior pass rusher. You have 3 young guys, give them the runway to see what they have. You don't need to take Mason Graham. If Mason Graham is there, and then guess what? Someone in the back end of round 1 is going to come calling to trade up, and you're like, "Hey, come play a premium to trade up for Mason Graham, and we'll take that, and we'll take the best edge rusher at pick 22, 26, or whatever." So to me, like, it's not really even a conversation. Like, we can have all these hypotheticals about, we can take a tackle, and blah 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 blah. No, it's an edge rusher, and that's it. And like, it's end of conversation. So that's how I sort of feel about it. But I know opinions vary.
No, I mean, I think without a doubt, edge is the one you should circle, because, edge is one of the deeper groups, but it's like I think to me it depends a little bit on who's there. Like, I think if Mike Green's there, you just have to pull the trigger. Like, I couldn't pass on Mike Green. If Mike Green's gone, and then you're deciding between like James Pierce and Ezeraku and Shamar Stewart and all that, and Mykel Williams, you're kind of like that sort of upside group basically. I would be tempted by 2 players. One of them, I'm sure Jahdae Barron is one for me, and then Malachi Starks would be the other one, simply because I think they're both blue chippers. And they're both at positions that the Falcons do need. But I agree with you, like, edge is still the biggest need. It's just like I love Mike Green. Like, I would be ecstatic to get Mike Green at 15. He's the one that I would, take. He's the one I just take without question if he's there on the board. But yeah, if we have to get into that next tier of edge guys, it's like, I guess because I think there's a chance he goes earlier than 15, Mike Green. It seems like opinions vary wildly on him, and in some ways he kind of doesn't strike you as the prototypical Falcons edge because he doesn't have super long arms. They seem obsessed with that. But yeah, I mean, I think the conversation kind of begins and ends with edge and how you're going to get it. And if you don't get it in the first round, then are you doubling up? Like, are you going to take a second rounder? And, what are we going to do with that? But yeah, I think that, it's very important to address the edge rush. There's no way around that. And we got, TD again, the $5. Thank you, TD, man. I appreciate it. Just says, edge is still priority number 1 for me. Don't get me wrong. Just think, given how Arnold Ebiketie looked, Harrison's upside, and Braylon Trice returning, filling a different hole isn't crazy. I don't think it's crazy, TD. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, to me, it's like, I would consider some other blue chippers there, if it's possible. But, I think. Oh yeah, Adnan. Did you want to chip in? I'm sorry. I thought I heard maybe you were going to say something.
No. I was like, I was just closing my water bottle.
Okay, the water bottle interlude here. Yeah, no.
The water bottle also wants an edge.
Yes, the water bottle is also weighing in on edge. And George Costanza is predicting Mykel Williams or Mike Green if Williams doesn't fall. I think Williams will fall. I think Mike Green is the one that could go earlier. But we'll see. But yeah, I like those predictions, George. I like those a lot better than the Ashton GT one. But yeah, I think, they have to address the pass rush. I think that's like one of the biggest things here. And, you mentioned Mason Graham, Aaron, and like a lot of people will probably be like, you can't pass on Mason Graham at 50. Like, at a certain point, like, part of why I was like slightly higher on their draft last year was because I could kind of see the Grady Jarrett, David Onyemata divorce, which I still think David Onyemata's probably getting cut. I don't know for sure, but that would be my guess, that he's not on the roster week 1. That they could justify all these defensive tackles that weren't going to play if they were going to play this year and be good. Now, I don't know if they're going to be good, but I think they could certainly set the table for Ruka Rororo and Brandon Dorlus to play a lot, especially Rororo. I think we need to have Rororo penciled in as a starter, or that pick is absolutely a disaster. And Dorlus, I think, should be a rotational player for you. And they got Morgan Fox, who can also be a rotational pass rusher. So it's like, they need a nose tackle. They let Eddie Goldman walk. But you don't have to take. I mean, I like Kenneth Grant as much as the next guy, but like you don't have to take Kenneth Grant at 15 to get a competent nose tackle. This is a deep nose tackle class, and we could talk about that, later on in the draft. But what do you think? You mentioned it, Aaron, with a trade down potentially from 15. Do you think that's something the team will consider? And is that a real possibility in this draft?
Yeah, I think it's certainly a thing that they should consider and will consider. I think it just all kind of depends on how the board stacks, right? Like this is the thing about this draft class where, the general consensus is there's not that many blue chip players. There aren't 15 guys that have first round grades or whatever. And so I think the thing, if you're the Falcons, you're hoping for that some team picking in the back half of round 1, particularly maybe a team that's looking for a tackle or something like that. And they have like one tackle left with the first round grade, a team like Houston, a team like Kansas City, or somebody like that, some team that has a glaring need at that left tackle position. And they're like, oh, our last tackle is Josh Simmons. Our last tackle is Kelvin Banks. Our last tackle is whoever, right? I think Armand Mimbu and Will Campbell will be long gone by the time 15 rolls around. But whoever that third or fourth tackle is, just using this as an example, that's going to be their last first round grade. And they're going to be like, okay, well, we want to come away from this draft looking to get that guy that we can plug and play as our starting left tackle or whatever. And that team's going to be aggressive, willing to trade up to 15 with the Atlanta Falcons. And the Falcons can, hop back and still probably get a similar player, as you suggest, where, you kind of cluster all those edge rushers kind of together, and there isn't necessarily a strong take on one or the other, depending on who's left on the board. So I think it makes total sense that a trade could develop, but like no one's going to really know that until we get to draft day. And so that's the problem with the whole trade down talk. It's like, I think everybody agrees it would be very beneficial to the Atlanta Falcons if they can basically get a player at pick 18, 22, 25, 27, or whatever that they could potentially get at pick 15, which I think is realistic given the edge rusher needs, over some other positions. But like it just really all depends on how the board is going to fall, and basically like you're just hoping for Sean Payton to pull a Sean Payton and just be aggressive, and you're hoping for like Ashton Jeanty to fall out of the top 10, and then Sean Payton's like, I got to go get Ashton Jeanty at 15 or something like that. So that's kind of the hope is, but like you're not going to really know that until draft day. So I think trading back is definitely an option, but it's just hard to put too much stock in it at this point until we actually know how the draft is going to go, because this is just kind of one of those drafts where it's kind of every team is going to have a very different draft board, because there isn't 10 to 15 guys that everybody agrees on are all going to be studs. There's like 3 to 5 guys in this draft class that everybody agrees on are going to be studs, and then everybody after that is just going to be based off of how you stack your board.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think there's a couple spots, like you said, like offensive tackle, wide receiver, if Jeanty falls, maybe tight end. Like if Tyler Warren goes super early, this is kind of a 2 tight end draft with Loveland and Colston Loveland as the other guy. So I could see, I know the Broncos were super high on Loveland. They also signed Evan Ingram, but come on, Evan Ingram's a slot receiver. Let's be honest. Maybe if Kyle Pitts could become Evan Ingram at this point, I think we'd all be pretty happy. But Evan Ingram's a very good slot tight end. Okay, no slander intended, but. I'm curious what you think about the possibility of a trade down, and if that's something you're pushing for at this point.
I mean, it always has to be a possibility, but especially this year, like you're already down a couple picks. You used up a 3rd rounder for Matthew Judon. You lost the 5th rounder in the tampering case for Kirk Cousins. So, this isn't like last year where you were dealing with a surplus of picks, where you had that extra 3rd rounder from the Calvin Ridley trade, and then the rest of your treasure chest of draft picks. And then, Terry Fontenot could sort of do what he loves and you trade up in the 2nd round with no real repercussions. Your This team has more holes than draft picks, given that those day 3 picks aren't really going to amount to much. Well, they could, but normally they don't. Um, it's a possibility. It's something that we always like talking about. It's something that the Falcons never do. It feels like, okay, this is the year. If they're not going to do it this year, then when? I think we asked the viewer one time to look it up for us, and the only time the Falcons traded back in the first rounder was 1990.
It's a long
So
time. Yeah.
there's not really much historical precedent there. Not that matters too much, but the precedent that does matter is that Fontenot just never does it in the first round. It again, it's the boring answer, but it is the correct answer that it just depends on how the draft shapes up, because it takes 2 to tango. You don't know if there's going to be a team that's even interested in moving up to 15. You don't know if there is going to be a player there that a team will give enough for to move up to 15. And then also, even if there is, if I'm the Falcons, Kevin, I'm with you on Mike Green. I feels like the more time that goes along in this draft process, I think in January I was talking about Malachi Starks possibly before free agency started. The more time that goes on, the more in on Mike Green I'm getting. And it kind of feels like if he's there at 15, I sort of wouldn't even be interested in moving back unless someone just gives you a treasure chest of picks, which won't happen because a quarterback isn't in play. I mean, who knows? Maybe Shedeur Sanders falls to 15 and some team wants to, give you the house for that. But yeah, it's definitely a possibility. I wouldn't be mad at it. I'd kind of be disappointed if they passed on Mike Green to do it. But if Mike Green's off the board and you move back, and it does all depend on also who would be there later on and when. What are we talking about here? Are we talking about moving back to 21? Or are we talking about moving back to 37? There's a wide array of ranges there of what it would take and how comfortable you would be, because it would kind of suck to not come out of this first round with an impact day 1 starter, because this team really needs one, especially on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, you mentioned, a big trade back, and funny enough, there was I think it was Eric Edholm's mock on NFL.com had the Falcons trading back with the Browns all the way out of the first round. I think the compensation was an error because he had the Falcons trading back out of the first round for a third and a fourth only. I'm guessing he just forgot to write down that there was a future second involved probably in that trade, at least, because that's the only way that would make sense. But, we did have a question from Alex Foster with the $5. Thank you, Alex. Saying, what's the furthest you guys would be willing to trade back? My friend jokingly said the 40s. I've stopped talking to him. Well, maybe not that serious, but I mean, I in the SB Nation Writers mock, I'm doing the Falcons pick again this year, and the Giants actually reached out about trading up to 15 from 34 for Shedeur Sanders because he was still there. I personally don't think Shedeur is going to fall to 15, but if he does, that obviously is a big opportunity for a trade down, whether it's the Steelers or anybody else. But curious, on how far would you consider trading down? Would you consider, if the compensation was correct, would you consider a big trade down, possibly out of the first round even?
If the compensation's correct, then again, it all depends on who's going to be there. Is Jihad Campbell there? If you move back, that
No.
could.
Walter Nolan was in this mock draft that somebody did. Walter Nolan was who they ended up taking at 33. So I would be fine with that. I mean, you're getting a first round caliber player in that situation. I mean, I'm not sure if I would have gone with Nolan. I don't know who else was on the board, but
It's maybe into the late 20s. Maybe Malachi Starks falls because safeties are just a neglected position and an undervalued position. I'd say right now, probably the late 20s, maybe 27 with Baltimore. I don't think Baltimore is interested in trading up, but sort of like that would be my floor, that 27, 28 range, because I mean, I don't know. It's hard to answer without knowing what the draft board looks like.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And yeah, it is purely hypothetical, obviously. But Aaron, would you consider like a big trade down, assuming the Falcons got proper compensation for a move like that? How
Yeah,
far would you be willing to go? Yeah.
yeah. In general, I tend to agree with Adnan. Like, I don't want to necessarily trade out of this position where like I have an opportunity to get like the third edge off the board, and then I move back like 10 spots, and all of a sudden like 3 edge rushers go in between there, and now I got to settle for like edge 7 or something like that. But like I think in that specific instance that you're talking about with Eric Edholm's mock draft, like I would be open to that big a trade back if it's for a quarterback like Shedeur Sanders, because then you can charge the quarterback premium, and that type of move is the type of move where you go from like 15 to 33 or 15 to 34, where Cleveland and the Giants are picking, and if they don't take a quarterback at 2 and 3 at the top of the draft, like you could charge them potentially a first round pick in next year's draft to move back that far. And that would be something that I would entertain if I'm looking at the board and I don't feel like there's an edge rusher at 15 that is definitely more valuable than 2 first round picks in next year's draft is. Then I would certainly entertain the possibility of moving back that far. But it's really only that under that very specific circumstance where a team is moving up for a quarterback, where you can charge that premium and be like, give me your next year's first round pick as part of this trade, and then maybe like a mid round pick swap or whatever, that sort of thing to even out the trade or whatever. But like that's really the only circumstances where I would be willing to trade out of the first round, probably at that point in time. But I'd probably, if a team like Buffalo wanted to come up for a corner or something like that at 28 or something, like you would probably get a 2 and a 3 out of Buffalo, and I would probably take that because, again, we don't know how the board's going to fall, but in theory, like I'd rather have whoever the 5th best edge is plus a 2 and a 3 than necessarily like the 3rd best edge, hypothetically, whoever you think those guys are. So I don't think there's that big a gap between those guys at the edge rusher position that would make me overlook a 2nd and a 3rd. But yeah, I'd be definitely open to moving back all the way to round 2, depending on the circumstances.
Yeah, and like that would be a big bet from the Falcons. Like if it's the Browns and the Giants, I mean, like there's a very good chance that's a top 10 pick. I mean, there's a good chance it's a top 5 pick. So, if they're willing to, yes, like if they call you and say we would move a future first, even if they only give us like a 4th this year or something, obviously they're going to trade up with that 2nd round pick. So we get like a 4th this year and then a future first, like you're talking about a potential top 10 pick. So
I was going to say that feels
yeah.
like it would be, very malpractice and negligent on their end, but
yes,
it was the Browns and the Giants. So
yes, that's what I'm saying, and
these are franchises that have, been very negligent in the past. And I mean, yeah, you never know. I can see a scenario, Shedeur Sanders is there and
desperation.
Yeah, and the Browns owners wants to take another big swing on a quarterback. So
yeah. I mean, yeah. If there's a future first involved, you got to listen to the trade offer at that point. That's exactly what I told the Giants today. By the way, I was like, "Well, is there a future first?" And they were like, "No." I was like, "All right, well, too bad."
We just stick to your guns in that negotiation.
Yeah. I was like, "Well, if you had 2 seconds, then we could talk, but you don't. So I'm gonna need a future first."
I will revise my stance of late 20s is assuming picks this year, assuming a 2nd rounder. If a team is offering you a future first, then all bets are off.
Yeah. If you get some kind of crazy offer, then you definitely need to consider it. But probably not going to happen. But definitely interesting to talk about. And TD adds with the $5. TD, thank you, man. Really appreciate you. Says, wouldn't be opposed to a Cardinals-like move like we saw last year with them trading back and then trading back up for someone they like. So if the Falcons wanted Mike Green, traded back a little bit, then traded back up. Yeah, I mean, that could work. There is a way maybe to make the value still pay out, in a positive way, depending on who falls. But yeah, I mean, I think ultimately if you trade like into the mid-20s, you're still going to get, I think, a good edge rusher. Now, you're not going to get Mike Green more than likely, but you could get like Michael Williams. You could get maybe Shamar Stewart. I feel like Shamar Stewart's either going to go in the top 10 or like he's going to go in the 20s. I feel like there's no middle ground with Shamar Stewart, but Michael Williams, James Pierce, somebody like that probably is still going to be there in the 20s for you. And like Adnan said, maybe Malachi Starks is, does fall for reasons. I don't think he should, certainly. But it could happen. You never know with this stuff. But, beyond the first round, the Falcons only have the second round pick in the top 100. Then they've got a fourth, and then they got 2 sevenths. So, not a lot to work with here. That's why we spent so much of this show talking about a trade down, because I think one of the only ways to really flesh out their draft class is to trade down and pick up those additional picks. I think they could trade down in the second too to get maybe a third, depending on how big the trade is. I mean, we saw the Falcons do that. Like, they pulled off it when they traded up to get Rook. They traded a third to make that trade happen. So, that can be an option, and I would definitely consider that depending on who's on the board. But given the limited number of picks that the Falcons have, Aaron, how do you go about sort of addressing the rest of their needs? Like, what are your priorities with those 2 picks?
Yeah, I'd probably go corner in round 2. That would probably be the ideal option. Get somebody that I can sit there and plug and play and across from AJ Terrell and say, this is our long-term answer at that cornerback spot to stop the revolving door that has existed opposite AJ Terrell for the last 5 years, right? I think, given the defensive needs, to me, you prioritize the premium positions. Edge and corner are the 2 positions that you're very unlikely to solve unless you solve them with the early round draft pick, right? If you're going to get a difference maker at edge, that's most likely going to be a very early first round pick or second round pick. Cornerback's the same situation. And so prioritize the premium position. But like, I certainly would be interested in trading back where, like, I agree with you. If you were to move all the way back to the end of round 2, you could probably get a third. If you move back like 5 spots, you could probably get a fourth, right? If you move back 8 spots, you could probably get a fourth and a fifth. And all of those types of trade backs, I think, would definitely benefit the Falcons because, as Adnan said, they have so many holes. On the defensive side of the ball, they could use a player at every single spot on the defense. And they also could use a tackle. They could also use a center. They could also use a tight end. They also could use a wide receiver. Again, those aren't priority needs. Those are more depth needs. But if I can pick up a fourth, a fifth, a 6 or whatever in some sort of trade back, that now I have the flexibility where, like, those positions, as they sit here today with the limited number of picks, you're going to have to punt on certain positions because you just do not have enough assets to essentially waste on spots that aren't necessarily going to be big time contributors to your roster this year. It's going to be the opposite of last year's draft, where you could, whether you could do this, but the Falcons did do this, right? Where they just drafted a bunch of guys who were like, oh, we don't have any intention of playing any of these guys as rookies. And like, this year has got to be the complete opposite, where you have every intention of every single one of your draft picks, however many you have to play as rookies. So I think cornerback is probably the position that I would prioritize. I don't really have a name for you because I've only really focused on like the first round corners, just to sort of go through that list and be like, eliminate, okay, these aren't guys that I would take at 15. And so then we'll circle back to the day 2 guys. Probably the only guy that I've watched that is sort of in that mix, but I think he'll be gone by 46, is Azareye'h Thomas out of Florida State, who you and I saw at the Senior Bowl this year. I thought he looked really good. I think he has that sort of press man cover skills, but there are other players that I plan on, watching in the coming weeks, like Maxwell Hairston at Kentucky, Siobhan Revelle, Eastern Carolina, Benjamin Morrison, Notre Dame, Trey Amos, Ole Miss, Darian Porter Jr., Iowa State. All these guys are sort of being projected to go in that round 2 range. And so my hope is that one of those guys will, I'll like one of those guys, and then ultimately the Falcons will select one of those guys at some point in round 2. But if all those guys are gone, that's where I become a lot more open to the idea of trading back at that point in time, because I don't want to reach on a third round corner at 46 when I can get that guy at like 58 or something like that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because I think there's like a group of corners that you could consider at 46. Like you mentioned, Azareye'h Thomas. Shout out my Niceville alumnus. Azareye'h Thomas went to my high school alma mater. But they, like you said, they did visit with Maxwell Hairston. So we know there's some interest there. Trey Amos is in that conversation. Savon Revelle, also very interesting. I know Darian Porter has a lot of fans too, as I think Revelle and Porter are kind of like those 2 guys that remind me of like Tariq Woolen, where it's like they just test like out of this world and teams are like, oh my God. Like, now Revel is more like, he just is coming off an injury, whereas his 2023 tape was incredible. But you know, I I think I could get behind that. It is a premium position, so that wouldn't shock me if that's the direction they want to go. Now, where do you sort of lean on day two with the Falcons' limited picks?
DBPA, so best player available, but defensive best player available, because yeah, like this team can use a player everywhere. If it's the best possible linebacker on their, or the highest linebacker on their board, or the highest cornerback on their board, or the highest safety, like it's it's just been sort of negligent the way that this defense has been built over the past few years, to the point where I'm like, you know what, if we want to spend a whole draft and, let's say a quasi draft, because it's not a whole 7 picks, it's 5 picks out of the 7. We want to use all of them on defense. I'd be perfectly okay with that. I'd be perfectly fine with that. I mean, they take an edge round 1. If they want to take another pass rusher round 2, who am I to say, that's a bad idea? But yeah, I would literally just look at whoever their top available defensive player is on their board in round 2 and pull the trigger there. Then maybe do the same thing. Well, not in round 3, but in round 4. We don't have a third rounder. Maybe that calculation changes a little bit depending on a trade back. If you can, get some more picks and then, possibly address some of those, luxury depth pieces that Aaron was mentioning along the offensive line. But right now, the defense has to be not just a priority, but a major priority.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Like, I think it still has to be defense. I mean, I agree with. I mean, I don't disagree with anything you guys said. Like, I think looking at that situation at 46, if there is a compelling trade down, obviously, and you didn't trade down in round 1, then I think obviously that is probably a priority to see if you can get a third round pick, because I think that would really help. Would really help things if you could get another top 100 pick, or at least maybe like a couple of day 3 picks to help round out this class. But you're kind of at the mercy of the rest of the NFL and what they want to do. But I wouldn't be opposed to like double dipping on edge if like Braden Swinson's still there, Landon Jackson, one of the Ohio State guys, if they like them. I think I would be inclined to chase like Xavier Watts if he's there at safety. I think that's another spot where they could stand to improve. I sort of feel like, I don't know, like at corner, like I agree. Like if there's one of those guys that we mentioned there at 46 and they can't trade down, then I think that's a very compelling place to go. I typically when I get there, I feel like Amos and like Ravel are usually gone. And then there's like maybe Hairston's there, or Thomas. So that could be compelling. But, I feel like the Falcons are probably okay with Mike Hughes outside. And I've often said the Falcons are okay with Mike Hughes. And if they're planning on playing him in the slot, I don't agree with that, for the record. If he's going to play outside, I think he's fine. So if they're looking for a slot defender, like a slot corner, I think you could probably wait until the 4th round for that and go for like a Jacob Parrish or, a Sebastian Castro or one of these, safeties that can also play the nickel. But I just don't know what they're going to do. I don't know what their plans are. I think this whole defense is kind of a little bit of an enigma right now. Like we're not really sure. And then, on top of that, like we also know that they want an offensive tackle. I don't think the Kelvin Banks thing is completely crazy. Like I don't know that they're going to take Kelvin Banks, but like they're sniffing around tackles everywhere. Like Logan Brown, and they've talked to a bunch of day 3 tackles, and they were talking to tackles at the Senior Bowl, and like they want an offensive tackle to develop. I think they've wanted that for a while. It just hasn't really panned out that way. And I think the fact that McGarry hasn't been extended is another sign that they're looking at tackle going forward. So, I think they are examining tackle closely, and it wouldn't shock me if somebody falls in the 2nd round if they do go for that tackle. I think that's unlikely to happen, for all the reasons we've mentioned, that this is just not a deep tackle class, and they're probably going to get pushed up and go early. But I think like that 4th round pick could be an interesting place to take someone. I do think there's some interesting guys around that range, Wyatt Milam's kind of interesting to me. Marcus Mbow from Purdue. Ozzy Trapilo is massive if you want a big tackle. There are some guys that maybe somebody could fall, but I don't know. I think this might be a situation where they want to get a tackle to develop and they just can't do it because they don't have any picks. So I think a trade down would probably have to happen for them to address that need. But yeah, I think this is adequately describing sort of the conundrum that the Falcons faces, which is that they didn't really have the resources to do a lot in free agency without like super mortgaging the future. And again, like I don't think it's wise to go all in on this season for all the things we talked about at the beginning of the show. Like we're not entirely sure if Penix is ready to be that elite quarterback yet. So are we really going to push all of our chips in on a season where this is probably much more of like, I think you guys said, like this is probably much more of like a soft rebuilding year, and it's probably for the best. And I think also like, ultimately the fact that Fontenot isn't like pulling a Thomas Dimitroff in 2020 and trying to like maximize a bad roster just to try to win enough games to save your job. Like, I think that's a respectable thing to do. Like, and I don't know if he's doing that because he thinks that's the best way for this team to win going forward, or if he's gotten assurances from the team that, they aren't on the hot seat and they can treat this year as a rebuild. We don't know. We're not privy to that information. If anybody wants to tell us, like Falcons, brass, if you want to give me a call and let me know all the inner workings of the front office, that would be fantastic. I don't have to share that on the show. You guys could just tell me for my own personal knowledge. But probably not going to get that information. So in that case, all we can do is work off of what we do know, which is that the team doesn't seem to be operating under an enormous amount of stress at the moment, at least. The moves they made haven't suggested that. So, yeah, I mean, at this point, like, I mean, to me, like at this point, I'm feeling, pretty concerned, considering we don't have a lot of draft picks and we didn't really move the needle in free agency. Is that kind of where you are at this point too, Aaron? Just concerned about this season?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of nailed it. Like, I think you can make a pretty compelling argument that the Falcons' low-key approach to not sort of overspending and mortgaging their future, whether it's cap space or draft picks, to go all in on the season is probably in their best interest long term, that it gives them more assets to build around Penix and rebuild this defense and all that stuff long term. And so you could very easily see, it really paid off for the Falcons in 3 or 4 years at this point, because I kind of feel like the Falcons kind of need a reset, because the last couple of years it's been like, oh, we're right on the cusp, ladies and gentlemen, and we're about to win, and we just need this one move to push us over the hump, and they just continue to not get over the hump. I think so. I think you can make a compelling argument. It's in their best long-term interest to not do all that, but at the same time, it's like, for the people in the building, is it really in their best short-term interest? Where it's like, are you setting up somebody else to succeed here in Atlanta, right? Another GM, another head coach, to have that success, that they can take the ball and run with it and be like, oh yeah, we got all this cap space and we have all these draft picks and we're going to be able to rebuild the defense and we're going to be able to build it around Michael Penix and whatnot. And so like, that's kind of the conundrum that the Falcons are in, where it's just like, I think, this may work out in the long run, but like, I don't know if it's going to work out in the short term. And so that's the challenge. And it's like balancing those two things, where it's like, you don't want the team to go all in this upcoming season, but at the same time, like, none of us are going to be happy sitting here watching another 7-win or 8-win season as we sit here just frustrated by the ups and downs and the inconsistencies. And so like, if for all of our short-term interests, it's like, hey, can we just win? Like, that's all we really want. Can we just get over that hump and win football games? And so I think that's the predicament the Falcons find themselves in. And, whether they can navigate that, I think is going to be fascinating. I don't, being the negative Nancy of the world within this fan base, like, I'm not particularly optimistic at this point that they are going to successfully navigate that, but I would love to be sitting here on draft weekend being, fist pumping and being like, oh man, they're like nailing this draft. Like they're absolutely killing it. And they're like threading this needle and they're trading back and they got that 4th round pick and they used it as that. And they moved, I would love to have that conversation, but I'm just not sitting here today being like, oh man, this definitely going to happen. It's like, I hope it happens, but I'm not going to hold my breath.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. And, it seems like at this point, everyone's operating with the assumption that they're going to be able to take advantage of the setup that's happening right now, which is we're not going to go all in free agency. We're not going to spend our future money. We're going to use this as like a year to get our books right. Maybe trade Kirk Cousins. That's all the Kirk Cousins talk. Maybe trade Kirk Cousins during the draft, after the draft, June, whatever, and then you can save some money next year. It's not going to save much money this year, guys. I mean, if it's post June 1st, it could save money, but the reason it's probably post June 1st is because they're eating some of the contract, which obviously means they aren't saving as much money. So, I think you would have to get a pretty good pick to convince me to eat the contract, but whatever. We'll see how they navigate that. But it feels like they believe that they're going to be able to have 2026 to then push their chips in, and again, probably for the best, but doesn't necessarily mean we're going to have a good time this year. So I'm concerned about that. Are you also concerned about that, Adnan?
Oh, I mean, yeah. This team won 8 games last year. I feel like they're a step backwards from where they were last year, unless Michael Penix just takes a huge leap this year, which we all hope so. But yeah, I feel like I can't sit here and say, yeah, this team has done enough to overtake the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the NFC South, or that they've done enough to overtake the Washington Commanders in that wild card race of the NFC, or the Green Bay Packers. Like I just can't see it. But maybe my tune will have changed over the next few months. It's a long time before the season starts, and we'll see where we sit in August. But right now, what we think in early April, that matters least. It's where we are in late August and early September that's going to matter more.
Well,
Yeah.
Here, what I'll say is, so just wait for that first slow motion replay of Michael Penix dropping a bomb to Darnell Mooney in voluntary minicamp. Then the vibes are going to be great again. So that's what we're looking forward to as you're sitting there in training camp watching Michael Penix hit these deep balls, which he didn't get to see from the last time the Falcons had a young quarterback. And so that's what we're all hoping for.
They'll all be in shorts. There's not going to be anyone within within 4
Yep.
feet of Michael Penix during that pass.
Yep.
We won't see it in preseason because nobody's going to play in preseason again, and I'm going to lose my mind over that again. The cycle continues.
Yes. Oh man, the work continues. But yeah, at least maybe this training camp we won't have to be like, who threw that? Who threw that? Probably because Kirk won't be throwing or won't be on the roster, so there won't really be any question about who's throwing what at these events. But guys, thank you both for coming on and providing your draft information, your takes on the offseason so far. We did have one final donation from George Costanza with the $2 saying, all right, I'm going to play devil's advocate with some revisionist history here. What if we did take Dallas Turner last year? How absolutely screwed would we be given what Kirk turned into? Does seem like the team had the foresight to hedge their bets. Thank God.
I mean, it is a good thing that we're not sitting here convincing ourselves like, hey man, if Shedeur Sanders falls to us at 15, we got to take him, right? I'm much more content to be talking about the edge rushers at this spot than I am sitting here preying on Shedeur Sanders falling down the draft board or convincing myself that Jackson Dart is the future of the Atlanta Falcons at this point in time. So we are in a better situation based off of just the draft takes at this point in time. But we'll see if it plays off.
It is, but in a parallel universe where this is happening, we'd be latching onto something else.
Yeah. I mean,
you can't just you have to have some hope. It's the hope that kills you, but you can't just be fully hopeless.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm really glad we don't have to go down that path, George. I do think that, I don't know. I can't remember. Were any of you guys like big Dallas Turner guys? I was not. I think I wanted Verse, but
on Turner.
Yeah, you were hurt. Okay, yeah.
But the alternate reality is that they would have to just take.
Yeah, they were going to take Latu apparently. Yeah. No, they weren't going to take the guy I wanted. Of course, nobody wants to take Jared Verse. Nobody cares what I think. But it did seem like they were very much on Latu, which is why it was shocking when they went with Penix. So obviously, all of those guys, Dallas Turner included, could go on to have very good NFL careers as good pass rushers. Rookie seasons are rarely the best judge of an edge rusher's career. But no doubt that maybe Verse is the one that would have changed the defense's fortunes last year. But other than that, not too much there. Also could have gone with Braden Fisk. I'm just saying, not just saying I was pounding the table for Fisk all year, like to get the Versk Fisk thing. It could have been us instead of the Rams, guys. It could have been us. I'm just saying. But I digress. That dream is dead. But yes, I know Adnan's got to take off, and we're done here. Thanks to Adnan. He's at Say Which Way. He'll be back now going forward, back from his break. And we also, of course, had Aaron Freeman with us at Locked On Falcons. Still recording there every day. Aaron, anything else you want to plug before we sign off tonight?
No, listen to Locked On Falcons. Hear me rant about why the Falcons have to take an edge rusher in round 1, and there's no other possible alternative out there. And a lot of draft content coming your way over the next 3 weeks between now and the draft to talk about alternative paths. And I guess all the edge rushers that the Falcons definitely 100% will be taking in round 1 this upcoming season. So, Locked On Falcons, subscribe, follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Absolutely, guys. Go give that show a listen, because I'm not publishing shows every day. So you need to, in the meantime, interim when I'm not publishing shows, then you should go listen to Locked On Falcons. Then as soon as my show comes out, you got to come right back, and then you can go back to Locked On Falcons after that. But definitely appreciate Aaron's time once again coming on, guys. And I'm Kevin Knight, of course. Thank you guys for tuning in to Falcoholic Live tonight, episode 322. We will have another mock draft coming your way at the end of the week, and then we will be having another Patreon/YouTube channel member exclusive draft. This time it'll be Trayshawn and I on Monday, probably Monday like 5 to 5:30ish Eastern. We will be bringing you guys a Falcons full 7-round mock draft, the first one of the season. So if you're a patron or a channel member, or if you'd like to become one, you guys are going to help us make those picks and navigate that draft. And then we will be continuing our draft coverage as the weeks go on and we get closer to time. We will also be doing live mock drafts for everyone as we get closer to the draft as well. And yeah, guys, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you. Shout out to Aaron. Shout out to Adnan for coming on tonight. We'll see you next time on the Falcoholic Live. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. We'll see you next time, guys. Have a great night.